All right, well, welcome everyone to the St. Rock Show. Very excited to be starting this new podcast in its most recent form and talking about everything from events to community in Web3, everything in between, from the marketing component to just building businesses and doing so even as young entrepreneurs. So we're very excited to be for y'all to be joining us, and I hope you enjoy the show. On today's first episode, I'm so excited to be joined by Trévon Hill, who is St. Rock's new COO, Chief Operating Officer. Woo! So,
Insert clap sound.
yay!
There it is.
And so very excited to be chatting it up, talking about kind of what we want to talk about today is just what are the learnings from Q3 of this year. Right now, today is November 1st that we're recording this episode. Just want to talk through what are some of the learnings from Q3. I know a lot of you out there are currently thinking through your strategic plan for 2023. And so we just want to share some of the learnings that we've had, not just in Q3, but also just throughout the year, thinking about some of the macro economic kind of things that are going on between recession dynamics. Things are still going on between Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot going on in the world, but it's been clear that people are very excited to get back and meeting in person. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to just give Trévon an opportunity to say hello to everyone, and also maybe just give us some background, Trévon, on just who you are, what your background is, and why you decided to join St. Rock.
No, that's like a really small, huge question that you threw in at the end. So Trévon Hill. Man, let's see. You can even like give me a run in for a fun fact. So just jumping right in, I'll say that I've been an entrepreneur now for about a decade. Wow, that's interesting. Didn't think about that. But I think formally started my first company around 18, 19. So that puts me right around a decade. Wow, that's really wild. This is going to be cool to look back at. We can do a celebration later this year. But so I started off really in the multimedia space with videography, photography, graphic design, just self-taught, really just to learn it for fun. And it was before really any of those skills, at least in the communities I was in, was like super popular, or at least to my knowledge, lucrative. So then by the time I get to my first kind of like couple years in undergrad, I just soon learned, especially going to Morehouse, how important it is to have those skills, but more importantly, how easy it is to scale those skills, especially when you're in a space where everyone else is kind of trying to learn their new thing, their new hobby, now that it's their first couple years out of the house. So that's where like my journey really started, and where it kind of really began. After undergrad, I kind of made the big choice to kind of pursue entrepreneurship full time. So ended up choosing not to go to grad school or really go pursue
What
like
did you
any.
study?
I did psychology, which depending on who I'm talking to, I either use it every single day or I don't use it at all. Right? It just kind of depends on who I'm talking to in the moment. But I think that the decision to not kind of pursue a graduate degree, even with that major, was an interesting one, right? Because especially for those of you who also study psychology, most people don't go into undergrad trying to study psychology. It's kind of like the fallback major, is what I was told over and over again.
All the people
But it was
drop out of biology.
right. It's the like, oh, bio didn't work. Let me jump to psych. But Morehouse is very, very different when it comes to psychology. It's actually a BS, and it's like very intense. You pretty much have to take almost the same classes to cover your science kind of portion of your degree. And so for me, I was really torn between like coming in, really being interested in being a psychiatrist, And then I got like really big into like stem cell research and like just like was like, oh, okay, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do a PhD. And I wanted to learn about the brain and do like neurobiology. I was a very heady kind of person back then, way back then. Definitely not that guy now. But yeah, I mean that's what I studied, and you know, I've always had a love for technology. Obviously, there's a huge intersection of technology and research, so that affinity definitely continued during my experiences at Morehouse and being in labs and things of that nature. Taught myself how to code, things of that nature. But I mean, you know, all of that like really grew my experience. So by the time I graduate, I'm really confident just in my ability to kind of pursue entrepreneurship more or less full time. So I started my journey actually working with a like private school and like helping them build their technology curriculum. And then from there, just kept growing. I had already started a couple nonprofits during my undergraduate experience, and so you know that kind of you know more grassroots side of developing and organizing was really helpful, especially with you know me getting into one of my biggest insights from Q3 and just it's been my insight honestly every year. I just keep growing with it, but those grassroots kind of you know the early start really helped me with understanding like the importance of like human capital and how meaningful it is to have the right team around you. So that's continued with me, you know, my entire journey from you know, moving to San Francisco with a one-way ticket, just you know, hungry and ready to learn, to starting a huge wave of events, ironically, but virtual ones during the pandemic, and gaining a lot of skill sets and really just being put in a lot of virtual rooms that I don't know if I would have been in had I not been kind of ready and eager to start something at the top of the pandemic. To where I am now, where I'm, you know, happy to say that, you know, in this partnership, I think that, you know, what's certainly true is that we both have a priority of the team and who's on the team and why they're on the team. But in general, I think, you know, the greater thesis that I'm really connecting myself with is more of around like this sort of beloved world community, but with technology, right? So how do you connect those two? You know, we're going to talk a little bit about like Web3 and those implications a little bit later. But you know, it starts at the core of bringing people together, right? So when I first started my kind of first agency, it was really hard because I had to get over this hump of like not necessarily feeling imposter syndrome, but wanting to honor the profession of what it meant to be an events professional or an event planner. And I
Mm.
kept saying like, that's not me, that's not me. Meanwhile, I mean, you know, my parents, grandparents, I come from a long lineage of people who have always believed in assembly, always believed in community. And so maybe none of us have been, you know, credentialed. But as far as like, you know, my entrance into the chat of what it meant to kind of bring people together, my love for technology has always put me in a position where I've never been interested in kind of like solely isolating, even at a distance. So, you know, I come from a split household. Whenever I was with one house, I always connected with the other one virtually. So I just like the connection for me, from my profession to like some of my just grounded skills, really all coming, you know, to fruition during the pandemic. Was something that I definitely couldn't have planned for, but as I'm now realizing that that same skill set is bringing me to what I'm even more passionate about, which is kind of you know bringing value to communities that you know may not be able to see it based on the current structures and economic infrastructure I should say, and being able to maybe even recreate that, so bring people together and allow them to be able to live and feed off of their own value, is something again that is becoming a dream come true to be a part of. So that's like my quick story slash quick reason as to why I found myself at Saint Rock Media, Saint Rock Labs, and all the other things that we're going to build in the future.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so you started um about 4 months, almost exactly 4 months ago.
On
And
that, yeah, man,
and in that time, we've basically, for some people, have done an entire like year's worth of work.
yes,
Um,
yeah,
but actually, so let's list it off, right? So we've done right out the bat, you were there for Hint. You
yep,
literally came off a plane from IMEX in Germany and
Hmm.
flew into Denver to help us with the registration for Hint. And then that was in Denver. And then
Yep.
you and I went to DC for like a retreat for a couple days or something like that. I can't honestly, this was like right around 4th of July. Um,
Yeah.
so you were in Denver for like a week, and then we went to DC for a few
But
days.
no, we had blurred. We had blurred con. So
That's
we
right.
had
So we went to
so
DC.
it
That's
was
right.
it was Hint. And then I think I touched base in DC. Then I went back to Denver. Then we went back to DC. Then we went to Atlanta. Then oh wait, New York is somewhere in there.
Oh
Um,
yeah, right after Hint, we went to NFT. Well, I went to NFT NYC and we met up in New
right,
York. Mhm.
right. That's it. Okay, so then we go to New York, then back to Denver, then back to DC, then to Atlanta to check out a studio that we ended up using for another event, which is going to be in Atlanta a month later. But in the interim, we also, well, I guess at that point, I go out of the country for like a month and work out of Greece, which was really wild. And then,
We were in
and then
Mexico too. You went to Mexico.
right. Dang, yeah, I completely forgot about. Okay, so Mexico, then Greece, then came back. We ran Black is Tech, and that was for the second year in a row, and that was really cool. Just to kind of be a part of that event. That was my second hybrid event in the past. At that point, like 30 days, 40 days, something crazy like that. I just came on, and then we backdoor that one with another hybrid event which was
No, same
CMX
time.
Summit.
Same
Yeah, like
same
it's
exact.
literally right there in the same flow. Um,
Yep.
and I think it's been a little bit slow, but then nope. Now we have the Little
ELC.
Management Summit with the ELC, which was back in DC, which was another sort of like hybrid activation. And now we're kind of rounding up and getting ready for Exhilo. So yeah, I mean, I didn't I was supposed to keep count. I did not. I know that I think I was over
Been a
10,
lot. A
but it's
lot's
been a
happened.
lot in the past 4 months for sure.
A lot's happened. And so, this is for those who are newer to like the events game versus those who are old, seasoned, everyone kind of knows that Q3 is go time, Q3 is event season. It's when for most companies that are preparing, no different than like Apple's WWDS event that takes place, I think like in Mountain View or wherever they're based.
Hmm.
But they're a big event that they put on in preparation for Q4 sales for Black Friday, for Christmas, holiday, for retail, Q4 is like, king. And so a lot of those companies, especially like direct to consumer or B2C type of companies, are ramping up all of their events in Q3 so that they can also start to identify from like a supply chain standpoint what their supply chain needs to look like in order to deliver in time for the holiday season. So that's kind of like that's why Q3 is so big from a B2C director to consumer standpoint. But then from a B2B standpoint, similar concept. Folks are thinking, everyone knows that strategic planning, aka budget planning for the following year, happens in Q4. And so a lot of the companies who offer, enterprise software for other companies, B2B type of business to business, they tend to do a lot of their marketing as well in Q3 in preparation for making sure that they are a line item in their clients' budgets, and they're a part of the conversation for strategic planning for 2023 in this case. We too are doing the exact same thing. And we're also helping our clients to think through, okay, great. We had a fantastic year in 2022. Here we are now in November. We're weeks away from Thanksgiving. Once Thanksgiving hits, the year's basically over. So it's kind of a sad existence, actually. Like these days don't even like count or matter. But so I guess like Trévon, from your perspective, what have you seen? This is probably the first year people are feeling like we're finally done with the pandemic. And
Mhm.
so you've been doing events and have produced hundreds of events just in the last couple of years. What have you seen from the start of the pandemic, starting in 2020 through 2021, and now 2022 getting ready to wrap up? What are kind of some of the trend lines that you're seeing as we're now starting to think about 2023?
Man, I mean, I would say the first thing I have to start with is just realizing the scale of the events industry. I don't think that I had the best understanding of it at all, and that's only because, as you just described, those are three very different industry segments in those period of times. But still, I mean, there's been no release from the gas. I mean,
Mm.
the amount of innovation that continues to go, while like things that we discovered in early 2020 are still amazing to folks today, right? So balancing this huge gap that continues to grow between just different levels of exposure, different budgets, but also I think like even regionally, one of the things I'm realizing is most folks are excited. I would say like you're going to see a lot of posts about everybody being excited to go back in person. If you did polls, you'd see a lot of people who would say like, "Oh yeah, I would choose an in-person event over a virtual event." Um, but I think the surprising thing that many may not know is there's still a popularity with virtual, either as a component or even as the primary kind of focus when like creating the design of the event. And so that's something that I think has been an interesting fact, because I would imagine, and even coming into this year, as I was kind of developing like what is going to be the sales strategy of the year, it was really to build out the hybrid and really more so back in person, capabilities, and really getting ready, for those capacity conversations. Like, how big is it going to be? How many different sites? We were getting real creative at the top of the year with thinking about like, okay, cool. What did virtual teach us? It taught us that we can actually do like 4 or 5 different micro locations at the same time and synchronize and yada yada. And then we started hearing folks be like, yeah, that sounds really great. I really love it. Can I get a hybrid event where basically the whole audience is online, but I just want you to record me and my talent in the studio? And I'm like, I don't know if I'd call that hybrid,
Right.
but
Called a show.
but yes, I hear you. And so I think that like one of the first things I'm learning is just that the technology, you know, the best way that I can think of how to say it right now is probably not the ultimately best way I'll ever say it. But it's just that technology continues to be impressive, especially for folks who may not have like the greatest exposure to different types of technology. So one of the things I've made space for myself is not kind of throwing a feature off or saying something very cavalier like, oh, that feature that's existed for a couple of years, and somebody being like, wait, what? You can network virtually, right? And so like I think it's
Yeah.
little things like that I'm learning that are still really highly valuable. So calling those out and
Zoom has
recognizing that there's still a lot
existed
of value there.
Zoom has existed for a very long time, and
Correct.
yet it
Yeah,
seems
good
like
point.
people just discovered Zoom during the pandemic. So,
Zoom, Slack, all of these,
yeah.
I would say like asynchronous tools or virtual tools. Again, yeah, to your point, we've used them for a long time. I remember in 2018, I was at a conference and one of the speakers zoomed in. And I remember, even then the audience was like very like, okay, this is cool. They just assumed technology could do that. But it's funny, my very first hybrid event that I did end of 2021, full scale, we had like half the speakers virtual, half the speakers in person. And the moment that we zoomed in the very first speaker, I mean, the crowd went wild. They're like, what?
Because
This
they
is
all know,
wild.
because they
They're
all
at
know what it
home.
takes now.
Yeah, they're like,
So,
this is wild. And so that was something that was really cool. I would say another big learning, just from an engagement standpoint, is that there's still a lot of room, and I know a lot of people are trying to look for this answer of what it looks like to engage folks virtually, but there's still a lot of room for like these smaller, but still yet very kind of groups and groupings, right? One thing is by kind of allowing small groupings to take place. And I see some features on uh, some of the virtual event platforms have really catered to this, and I've seen some really do it well and some really win. But there was a huge phenomenon during the pandemic, right, which was the Clubhouse phenomenon, right? And what was really amazing about it was really that people had to kind of have this like super low energy but high yield as far as entertainment and like in real time entertainment, I should add. And so from a networking perspective, I mean, if you think about like one of the high value items that you get from going to a conference to network, right? It's really having these like one-off conversations or the ability to kind of converse, and then a person walks up, overhears the conversation, joins the conversation, right? Some people don't like that, some people do. I found great success in that. And so a lot of conferences that are able to kind of continue to take advantage of like creating spaces and small areas for folks to convene and figuring out how to do that virtually. I've seen that done in really simple ways, like during break times, setting up like, rooms for 5 to 10 minutes and, then closing them off and then coming back to the programming, little things like that, that have had like huge impact rather than trying to create, a whole design and create a whole segment that's meant to kind of get people to talk to each other or things of that nature. Folks are kind of navigate the room the way that they want to. I've seen events where, chats have been like super activated and no one encouraged it, right? I've seen events where they had 2 or 3 people that they paid to do chat engagement and they got maybe 2 messages, right? So a lot of it is just really thinking about the community that you have, what they're used to, what were their behaviors, when they were in person, and then what do you think that they would really enjoy to do now that they're in virtual, and then kind of figuring out that synchronicity when you're looking into to hybrid. So I think that the 2 big lessons again are just kind of one, from a features perspective, just realizing that whoever the client is, it's like really starting and explaining the entire suite of capabilities, because you just never realize like, who and where they're at kind of in their career and what they've exposed to, and then what their community's ready for. And then the last one is just like simplicity is always going to win. I think in my instance, like I don't think that in the instance of simplicity versus complexity, that complexity ever wins per se. I think it's always just really cool to the person who can say they accomplished it. But when you really start thinking about leading people and leading communities, everyone's going to want like the quick, the easy, the simple way to do it. And so to me, it's just a constant reminder as someone who's always trying to innovate and always trying to do it really cool. Is like, hey, the lower barrier to entry, right? If I can convince all of these folks to do it because it's easy to do, they'll do it, or they'll at least try, right? And now
Yeah.
I'm one step closer to kind of getting to the end all be all of what the intention was. So those are kind of the 2 things that I think I've learned the most from like an attendee perspective, aside from obviously folks just being excited that they're outside again. So
Mhm.
yeah, those are probably my 2.
Yeah, I think that as I think about 2023, a lot of clients so far are talking about hybrid. I think, folks thought that 2021 was going to be the year of hybrid. I think 2022 ended up being that year. And in some cases, folks, this actually comes to your point around event organizers really understanding the audiences that they serve and
Hmm.
knowing what, not wanting to impose your idea of what you want for the event. Obviously, as the event organizer, you're going to have really good clarity and vision about what you want, but then also having the reality of like, okay, but who is our audience? Are they
Hmm.
a young early adopter emerging technology type of group, or are they not that? And
Right, right,
need
right.
a lot of tutorials on how to make sure that they are in the I remember on one event that we were producing, and one of the speakers was like, how do I know if I'm in the platform? Or oh no, they said, how do I know if my internet's on? And just
Man,
like,
that's
yeah.
don't get me started on like
Oh
speaker
no.
bloopers, boy. I tell you what, that's a whole nother
So,
episode.
so there's your vision as the event organizer, and then there's the reality of where your audience is. And
Yep.
so having really practical steps of helping them move towards, emerging technology and innovation maybe for your community, Zoom is innovative, right? And
Right,
so
right.
understanding and having empathy for the community that you're serving, because at the end of the day, the event is for them and less for you. And so that's our approach when we're thinking about in like kind of working with clients on, okay, cool, who is your, and this really just comes into like event design. It's just
Yeah.
understanding what is the attendee experience going to look like? What are you hoping to accomplish with this event? If it's a marketing, I put events in really kind of two categories, maybe three. You know, one being the event itself is the product. So
Mhm.
these are going to be the events where you spend, especially if it's like B2B, you're going to spend a lot of money to attend. It's professional development. Usually that's in the budget for these different companies, or like professional development costs. A lot of sales and business development folks are going to be at those conferences looking to get deals done. Another category is, okay, cool, the event is the marketing to drive awareness or to drive action towards the product. So the
Mhm.
event itself may not be the product. I think in some instances, some savvy event marketers have been able to blend the two models to
Mhm.
help offset those costs, because they have built a great audience and they do allow other like sponsors to come in and kind of, you know, gain visibility as well. Um, but those two being like the primary, and then the third being kind of like internal events.
Mhm.
So, but just thinking about that, a lot of our clients, I think, now that we have gone through this for 3 years, I
Yeah,
think
right.
most people have, you know, attended an event on Hopin or Cvent or on 24 or Bevy, definitely Zoom. um,
Right, right.
but they're now in a position to where I think people are thinking a bit more outside of the box. They are thinking about things like, oh, interesting, we can do hybrid. We can, and hybrid isn't going to just be we're pointing a camera and filming or recording and streaming what the person is presenting, but a more holistic, immersive experience where something that we did this past fall was a really cool metaverse after party,
Yeah,
where
that's
we
cool.
live streamed like a DJ in, and everyone is able to make their avatar. Um, and then also integrating some of these like Web3 components into it as well, where your ticket is your NFT, and that's how you gain access to these different spaces and these different environments. And so just kind of thinking creatively around what are the tools, because at the end of the day, that's all these things are. They're just tools, to your point, Trayvon, and
Mhm.
thinking about, okay, how do we create the right mix of tools and experiences to help engage and connect our audience?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I heard um, really early on in the hybrid conversations was understanding that hybrid is kind of a spectrum, and the
Mm,
spectrum is between the two polars of a virtual event with physical components, and then a physical event with virtual components. And if you understand those two being the polarity, and then you kind of find where your event sits in the middle, at least from a design perspective, you can start to focus on, the primary goal of every event is obviously, the attendees or the guest experience, right? And so with that, I think one of the things that you mentioned, which is really important when you're starting to plan an event, number one, and this is probably something I think every event planner can speak to, is the more time the better, right? One of the coolest things I think I heard during my time at IMEX was somebody talking about kind of planning events being like painting, like doing coats of paint, right? Where somebody who is really early
gonna
on in their career, you'll
that's
say
good.
that they'll put like one or two coats of paint, and they're just like, oh, that's good, right? While somebody who's seasoned, that they come back, coats
Yeah,
of paint, then they let it sit, then they come back, they do another two coats of paint. So
yeah.
when I first heard that, it really put some things in perspective for me, because that's the real reason why you need time. I've done events in like a week, and I am deeply upset that I've been able to do that, because of course, obviously, in my mind, I now hold that as like something I can do. But unfortunately, when the drastic differences between when you give yourself that time to continue to review, you pull out way more.
Mm,
Most of the events that we've been able to accomplish quickly comparatively speaking, what we've been able to get out of the event, what we've been able to set up inside of the event, and as far as like how impactful we've made the experience end to end for all of the different types of people that can attend. One of the things I remind myself constantly of where virtual can continue to rise and be extremely relevant is in its accessibility. Right, the mere fact that there's so many folks who prior to 2020, may have gotten a bit of inclusion here and there, but now almost nearly like 2 years later, or yeah, about 2 years later, it's almost kind of exclusive, or it's almost implied to every event that there's going to be some level of kind of inclusivity there, right? So even if the event is fully in person, there's like some sort of like, okay, there might be recordings, there might be this, where they're going to encourage people to first and foremost be there, likely for sponsorships. But in the other side of it, they're looking, to make sure that they're more inclusive, even if it's just to continue to resell their and reuse their content, right? So I think that's something that's been a huge win over the last couple years. But I think going into the next 2 years, I think a big focal point will be not only this sort of segmentation between virtual and in person, and figuring out how to again create more synchronicity in their timelines and how you're kind of moving forward in programming. But in another side of it, I think we'll continue to see a rise in the evolution of events as a result of making them more accessible. Because again, I think that with me, I've definitely learned, even prior to, as I said, like getting into more of my grassroots background. The more I got into accessibility, the more I realized, like, man, like this is, accessibility is really for all. Like it's a thing that makes a lot of people better, right? It's the more accessible that we get just as a culture and even as an industry. So to me, I think that that's something that we'll also see. And even as you're planning for your event designs, it usually feels really expensive when it's one of the last things you think about. But if you design with it in mind, there's usually a lot more value to your attendees and to your guests at large if it's something that you do at the top part of your design process, and if you give yourself time to design, a thoroughly thought out event.
I guess like final question here I'm thinking about is, what are some things that we've learned, right? Like what are some of our learnings in Q3 of this past year that we can just kind of add value and pass along to others who are help other folks avoid the mistakes maybe that we've made.
hmm
What's maybe like one or two things that you've taken away? It can be either from like the last quarter or even just like this
Yeah.
past year, that can help save save someone, save
Man,
them a
yeah,
year on their life, because sometimes events like they will take
for
a
real.
month off your, yeah.
So my are going to be team and time, right?
Okay.
Those are going to be the two that I'm going to play with from a principal perspective. On the team side, and really again, like they do complement each other. But on the team side, I would say that it's so much more important to know, that your team is aligned on the same end goal, right? I think oftentimes, especially when you're kind of contracting, you think it's really easy to go like, okay, great, like I just needed you for this one quick thing. If you could just do that one quick thing for me, I'm good to go. I'm going to move forward. I just need you for that. I don't need to give you the whole vision. And I've noticed that when I've thought about that in the past, that's usually because I haven't figured out a concise way to say the vision. But in fact, I usually win when I can bring on a team and I can make sure that everyone knows kind of the weight of the opportunity, and or at least at a bare minimum, they know the weight of the opportunity to me. And if I can spend the time, dedicating on the front end, making sure I'm clear with communicating that not only to myself but also to the team that I'm going to embark on this journey with, I've noticed that it's night and day as far as how communication works, how the work product works, how they see engagements with you. It feels less transactional. If they see your passion behind something, if they see how you're able to look into a situation and that you're going to get even more out of it, it tends to change their paradigm, not only again around you, but in the way that they do their business. So again, going back to team, it becomes really important that whoever you're working with, to make sure that there's some sort of goal alignment, right? It's very obvious and very easy to say like, hey, I need you for this service. Here's your payment. Great. But if you're able to add a little bit more goal alignment with that vendor, with that partner, whoever it is, there's destined to be, again, greater results for you,
Okay, well,
not only in that process, but
tell us a
also,
story of how you didn't do that.
oh man, all righty. I'll say, a very easy one, very easy one, is like, equipment rental.
Mm,
During one of our events, I rented a piece of equipment that was like, it was a controller, essentially a DJ controller. Um, and more or less, I thought it was going to be very simple. It ended up being a more elaborate process where like they didn't even make the version that I was looking for, that the talent needed. It just got like everything else was really working except this one last piece. So finally, what I did is I was just like, okay, cool. I'm just going to search for some places. I'm going to find someone, and we're just going to get it done. The person who I ultimately contacted to be able to help us with this, was like, yeah, like I'll I'll get it to you. I'll make sure you get it, yada yada. And they did. They got it to me on time. Everything worked out. Everything was fantastic. Now, during the conversations with them, I kept everything really short because I was like, this is very simple, right? It's a very easy. I'm asking for something. They're going to give it to me. I'm going to pay for it. It's going to be simple. When they brought it, um,
as if. That's
when
fun.
they brought it, it didn't work. And so, so the reason why I'm telling this story is because
I'm so triggered. I'm so triggered.
yeah, no, it was bad. It didn't work. And when they brought it, one of the things that I realized is, again, in that story, um, I never asked if it worked. They assumed that one of the things that I was using it for, I mean, one, they didn't know. They didn't know what I was using it for, and ultimately that wasn't their concern. But they just knew I was only renting it for a couple hours. And so, as simple as that, and the reason I use that one, as my example, without kind of getting into many of the details of my other examples, is just to say, like, that person who I was working with, had I kind of spent the time to just explain them what I was using it for, right, and why, and what I plan to do with it, it could have quickly nipped that in the bud. Sure, they, brought it to me, everything was great, it was a good price, all of that, but just that small like nuance of me being able to explain what I was going to use their service for, what I was going to use the product for, again, it ultimately changed, and delayed a lot, right? So I say that just to say that, like, even in that story, not to say, again, anytime you rent equipment, you got to tell them the whole thing, but the importance of making sure that you can communicate to your team. Another good example, just with someone that's a little bit more long-standing, is like, bringing in the events side of things. You're dealing with vendors and contractors that are going to come in, and essentially you all are a part of the same team. You now represent yourself, in front of the client or in front of guests or things of that nature. And so I'll never forget, for Hint, we basically became, Voltron with
And
the
you.
what is it, the venue team, right? And one of the key items there is like, we let the entire kind of, at least the first day, we let the entire first day go, and even probably days prior, before I even got there, without them knowing what the event was. Right. And so when the event kind of started, and we kind of explained like what was going to be the contents and things of that nature of the event, for them, not only was it a huge surprise, but like I remember there being like some last minute things that they offered, from the venue perspective, that ended up being a lot more helpful for not only the registration portion, but also the way that we dealt with the sponsors and things of that nature, all of which, they wouldn't have known had we just kind of been super transactional, like, okay, we need this, we need that. But talking through what the event was, what we were planning to do with it, what the goal of the event was for the client, just that extra context helped them, even it helped them produce and give us the allowance to have an even better event for the client, which I think was, something that probably went unmeasured, but for me was a really big piece, because as a design thinker and as a systems thinker, being someone who was helping with registration, I of course saw what the consequence would have been had we not made those pivots like right before we got into go time. And then, kind of getting into time, right? So time is like my next really big one. I have been addicted to the word asynchronicity since I heard it. I really love this idea of being able to say, like, hey, it's so cool to have your entire team working on different things at the same time. Um, and then you start realizing, like, okay, well, it actually takes even more time when you all are working on things that is not compatible with the other one is doing. So one of the big lessons I would say is, let yourself build, like once you get your team, like really spend a lot of time with that team going through again, your goals, your objectives, making sure everybody's clear on like what are the key performance indicators of what my, like how does my work affect your work, right? If you all can kind of get into that groove of really understanding that, especially at the core level, you'll naturally grow into various forms of asynchronicity. But that's been my biggest one, is like, again, taking your time with your team, right? So once you find the team that works the best with you, the people that you want to work with, then it's like, okay, now take your time, right? Because if you don't, it ultimately, as things speed up, right? A friend of mine used to say, like, got to go slow to go fast, right? I always thought it was a weird thing to say until I started to live it, and I started to see that what the differences were between finding someone being like, hey, we're agreeable, cool, let's run together, and it's like, well, no, not everybody can run with you, right? Like you have a different pace. And so like you've got to start finding out what people's paces are. And usually you do that by taking the time on the front end to really establish, again, not only that relationship, but the working relationship and the working understanding. Like what is it that we are, going for individually and together? Being someone who is now built, I mean, I can't even tell you how many teams I built at like the agency level and then down at the per event level. You see a lot of different personalities come and go. You see a lot of personalities that you're like, oh, I know you from a mile away, and then you get closer and you're like, oh, you are completely different than what I realized. A lot of that, again, really for me has come to just again taking my time and really kind of honing in on my skills of not only building people but also like spending the time to help people who I know who want it, right? And not necessarily put too much into people who really don't, want the help, right? That's another big thing, right? When you're dealing with your teams, like they will kind of tell you what they're interested in from a leadership perspective. And I know that's a whole nother side of the conversation, but I really want to speak to those two things because again, when you're growing your team, they will either give you a lot of time back or take even more time from you that you even thought that you had, right? And so that kind of core essence of escalation, I should say, from hey, get the right team moves you into hey, spend the right time, right? Because you get the right team with the right time, and now you have again the perfect combination. You get the wrong team, wrong time, and now you have burnout, right? So those would be kind of my two
Yeah.
kind of big pillars slash kind of lessons that I got from this quarter.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that very you touched on a word there at the end that I think if done poorly is the result, which is
Mm-hmm.
burnout. And I remember I had a conversation with a group last week, and they too, this is another company, and they also produce events. And something just kind of connected for me in that moment, which I just knew to be true. I just had never said it out loud before, but I talked about how there's the inexperience of an individual, and then there's the inexperience of a team working together. And
Mm-hmm.
um, and this is why Trévon and I were talking about this just as we do all the time throughout the day, but we were talking about how um, your team needs reps together.
Right.
You want to do something innovative. If you don't have an A player team, it's not going to happen. And part of what makes an A player team is having A players as individuals. You might actually not even have to have A players at every single position to be in
Right.
every role doesn't have to be an A player, but if at least your team leads are, and if there are some folks who are like B's or even maybe even you don't want too many C's, but if you at least have like A level like team leads, it makes all the difference in the world. And if you want to do something ambitious and if you want to do something innovative, even if it's not innovative from like a global standpoint, but more from like a more micro instance standpoint, that's only going to happen if you don't have an inexperienced team. And
Mm-hmm.
so this would be my biggest advice is that and if you do, and if you continue to try to push this team that you do have, that's not used to working together, that does not have the right call signals and communication capabilities, and I'm able to just give you a look and you know what that means, kind of communication and cadence and working together, you are going to have a burnt out team. And if you have something that you're trying to do from quarterly events to a big flagship event, whatever the case may be, you're not going to have the team to take you to the finish line.
Right.
And so when we're to kind of put a bow on this, when we're thinking about just 2023 strategy, a big question that you want to ask yourself is, okay, cool. You've thought through, okay, great. Your company has, like, especially to you marketers, your company has your plans for 2023. These are the revenue goals. These are the leads that, in order to hit those revenue goals, your team is responsible for converting, different segments of your customer base or audience into the next segment. And it's going to require these quarterly events, or it's going to require this big annual event. And the question at the end of the day is, do you have the team to get you to the finish line? And so I think that would be the biggest takeaway, is burnout. And even from like an agency standpoint, as when we think about like the clients that we want to work with too, we're not just thinking, oh, there's this one big annual event that we're producing next year. We're like, oh no, there's like 10. And so when we're thinking through even our capacity going into the new year, we're having these exact same conversations of like, well, what do we want to accomplish as a group? What do we want to prioritize? What is our big focus? And the sustainability of all of this. People, from a mental health standpoint, from a physical health standpoint with COVID, and there were so many people who have long COVID. And I think that being in the service industry, so many companies or so many groups that might not have the same degrees of, health and safety policies. I remember the first event of the year that St. Rock produced, I got COVID at. And I hadn't had COVID in over, right, exactly. I hadn't had COVID in over a year. And so it's just kind of interesting to think about, and just being really empathetic as in a position of leadership. So many event organizers have just communicated how much burnout they've experienced. And yet now that we're even in these kind of recession type market dynamics, most savvy marketers, most savvy businesses know that when market conditions go down, that's actually the time to double down on your marketing efforts. And so when you're thinking through, and not even talking about virtual versus hybrid or anything like that, when some companies are pulling back, probably some of the most savvy companies know that this is the time to double down and to take market share. And so when we're thinking through this upcoming season, with, people are probably a bit burnt out from these COVID years. The technology and the strategies are ever changing. You want to have a really fantastic team. You want to make sure that you like the people you're working with. That makes a difference. But just all of these variables, I think, are some of the things that are going to help set your group up for success, and some things to just kind of keep an eye on. And really, just now that we're headed into kind of the holiday season, really love up on your teams, and really give them just a lot of kudos, and sharing gratitude for all the work that they've been doing, and making sure that they feel really filled up, especially as we kind of head into this new year and new season. So anyways, those are our thoughts about Q3. And as as we're thinking about going into the new year, really excited to see what all of you all come up with. We're going to be doing this podcast every week. We're going to have different guests from all types of industries talking about events, community, Web3. And we definitely want to hear from you all as well. If you have any questions, we'd love for you to we're going to be posting about these upcoming episodes on LinkedIn and Instagram. And so if you have questions, we definitely want you to post your questions so we can make sure that we answer them. And if you want to be a guest on the show, we'd love to, invite you to be a guest as well. So go ahead and subscribe. We're on all the podcasting platforms as well as YouTube. So subscribe to our channel, and we can't wait to do it again next week. Thanks so much, Trévon.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. All right. See you tomorrow.
All right.
See you guys. Thanks.